He was great.
Yeah, he's interesting.
Yeah, had a great chart we ought to get a hold of too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always nice to meet someone who has access to data. That's because that's not easy to get.
Yep, he put some time and effort into it.
And it was like live data as of yesterday.
Hey, Eric. Hey, Jean.
Hey.
Hi, Gene.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Sharon.
Hey, Sharon.
Sharon, this is Mark. I need to reach out to you tomorrow on a couple of things, if I could. A couple of follow-up items that we've talked about before that I just need to
Okay,
close the loop on.
great.
Thanks.
She'll be tied up in a department head meeting probably till about 10, Mark. That's AM.
Very good.
Okay, we got. We could probably make sense to kick off now, right? I think the only one we're missing is Andrew. Sean can't. Sean sends his regrets. Him and his wife had a daughter this week, so he's sends his regrets, but isn't able to make it. So we can call the finance committee to order, and then Mark Doxer, I'll go over you to call the.
We're going to have to wait a little bit. As of right now, we don't have a quorum. So
Oh, you don't? Oh, I thought you did.
I'm seeing
Carlo,
me and Carl.
Vanessa and Karen, don't you have?
Oh, sorry. I have my system shut out here. Let me see. Sorry. You see
I'll
them.
keep you honest, Mark.
Oh, there they are. Yeah, I just didn't see them on screen. They're hiding. I'd like to call the select board to order. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you, Mark.
Chuck.
Call the school committee to order. Aaron,
Here.
John,
Here.
Sean,
Here.
and Carla.
Here.
And Tom won't be joining us.
All right. I was trying to pull up the agenda and I lost it in my. Oh, here it is. I got it now. And then, so the first thing we had here are the meeting schedules. I mean, and so I think the only meeting that we have scheduled up after this one is we have another one in 2 weeks. And again, but I think we have the bulk of kind of business from the forum perspective ahead of us right now, as far as at least voting on the warrant articles later on in this agenda. I might just if we can, I might just kind of table that review of the meeting schedule, just so we can get into, Bob, into your updates on the capital plan and debt planning, and so we can move on to the warrant articles. I don't want to, conscious of some of the folks that are on that were up late last night and moving through that, through those other pieces.
Okay, you want me to start it?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let me just share a screen so you can all follow along. The warrant articles for tonight have a lot of debt. So I thought it would be helpful to review capital and debt together. The warrant articles are all enterprise fund, but it's always good to get a thorough update of the general fund. Just so you know, generally we make a big capital update this time of year and then a smaller one for the annual budget process in April. So our town department heads and schools are in the habit of reviewing capital usually in the early part of the fall, and then try to make as few changes as possible in the spring. So what you see here is just an overview of a 10-year capital plan. I'll just point out a couple things. This box here is not related to these items over here. It's just a summary for me that I'll get into later for what changes we're requesting for both fiscal 21 and fiscal 22. So you'll see those in a warrant article, in addition of some capital items and some removal of some other capital items. Specifically this year, back in June, we cut almost $900,000 by the time town meeting was done from what would have been a typical 5% debt and capital plan. If we proceed and town meeting agrees to put back almost $250,000 of capital, that'll leave us at about 4.5% for the year. You know, and kind of the thinking going forward is this capital plan is 5%. As you can see, it's balanced to 5% every year. There is a surplus available from your policy. So the capital plan, including debt, which I'll get into, is generally in good shape. But again, just a reminder that, and let me just enlarge this a little more. These projects have been identified, but they are not included in this capital plan above. There's $10 million worth of what I'll describe as recreation or athletic improvements, a lot of them around the high school. And those are identified and priced out as of 2 years ago. The prices probably have not changed much. The only real unknown, and the rec committee is working on a Birch Meadow master plan. So that $1 million has been a plug figure for several years. I still don't know what they'll come up with. These projects over here are not close enough to be identified with a cost. There's whatever the schools need to do with Killam. And just as an aside, we had some drainage work planned in the Killam fields, but certainly there's no sense in doing that if, for instance, a school might be built on those fields. So that was removed from the capital plan. Likewise, a year or so ago, the schools were looking at different sites. So we also pulled some work on a field at Wood End, again, in case the schools were to build on that area. Then, further away, a community/senior center and a DPW project, should the Camp Curtis thing ever work out. And that will undoubtedly be very complex financing. So these things are not included, but you can see over the next 10 years, there's about $10 or $12 million available of extra room for capital projects at 5%. Now, things always happen and capital appears. So it's not like, we really expect there to be $12 million extra. But in general, the capital plan is very healthy, as you can see. I'm not going to go over the individual items unless anyone has questions. But I do want to jump down to the debt schedule. I guess I'll remind everyone, since Greg's here, next year we're planning to spend $1.3 million, not in debt, but just in cash, if you will, and replace the ladder truck. So that's the big expense for next year. And in terms of things at November town meeting, I thought I'd just go over those as we go over the warrant. Again, there's a handful of relatively small items. In terms of sort of a debt schedule, This is the dollar amounts of what's planned. So this is what's in front of November town meeting and what we'll ask you to take a vote on later. Mount Auburn tank has already been approved by town meeting, but it has not been borrowed yet. We're still in discussions. Article 7 is Gazebo Circle. That's a very specific project. It has been increased to $1.1 million. It used to be $1 million last spring. So I will want FinCom to revote that. The others, you could revote if you want. You voted in the spring and the numbers haven't changed, so it's really up to you. But Article 8 is a lead removal project that the MWRA will loan us money at no interest rate. And then there's $4.3 million combined in Article 9 for downtown and in the downtown area water improvements. It's divided into two pieces because, again, $1.5 million is available from the MWRA at no interest. That'll be a 10-year, and then we are responsible to go out in the debt markets and borrow the $2.8 million ourselves. And just to keep on the horizon, there's need to do smart meters for water and sewer, but that's not planned for a few more years. It's just difficult to afford the amount that will be within the budget. And there's another phase of downtown work, which is described in your handout, but as you can see, that's several years away. That's not really the downtown, that's just near the downtown. In sewer, Sturgis Station has already been approved. Downtown work is needed, much like water is 4.3 million, sewer is a lot less, stormwater is a lot less, and more focused on the Haven Street area. That's $1 million, that's Article 10. Again, smart meters in the future. And then stormwater, let me just look. Stormwater, I didn't put a heading, but this is the stormwater $1 million. Again, that's Article 11. Here's his stormwater. There is no debt planned for the general fund at November town meeting, nor do I expect to ask for any debt authorization next spring, I don't think. But there are 3 projects on the horizon. This one will get a lot of discussion, I'm sure. It's energy improvements. It's if you will, performance contracting part 2. Our facilities director is overseeing a contract with a firm that did our first energy audit, and they're doing another one right now. They have $300,000 in capital. That would cost in the ballpark of $75,000 if we just do the audit and do not follow with any other work. If we do follow with work, then the audit itself is free. And again, we'll get more into that, probably not November town meeting, but possibly next April, in terms of some of the components are boilers, and there's all kinds of creative, green community type things. There is a streetscape improvement program. Above I described all the below ground work, and obviously the above ground work had to wait. This will certainly be an issue of discussion as to, do we want to spend money above the ground? And if we do, what would it look like? We've identified as staff about $7 million worth of improvements, and that's pre-COVID, that could be made to make the downtown more attractive. That's Haven as well as some parts of Maine. And just to throw that in there, that you saw all the below ground work. The last part of the below ground work is to pave all the roads. So we certainly don't want to pave roads and then find out there's some above ground work that might be nice and we have to rip up the pavement. So there'll need to be a little coordination there. I don't anticipate that $7 million is affordable. We, again, pre-COVID, we were able to secure $5 million of financing within the state's bond bill. For those that don't know, bond bills are potential future funding for projects. We have a few $1 million from a bond bill a couple of years ago for some of our non-school parks. It's really a question of when the governor says there's surplus in the state budget, off you go. So we're certainly not getting our hopes up for the $5 million. And lastly, there's $6 million of building roof repairs. That's both schools and town, might be a little more schools. They could be done as capital. Some of the items are pretty large. They're over $1 million, like the ladder truck. But for now, they're just planned to be done together as a debt authorization. So this is just another view of that. And again, the debt schedule, the most important figure on this page is within the levy limit. This is the amount of debt that, if you will, crowds out other spending in our operating budgets. So this figure here, not the excluded debt, which is the high school and the library, but this figure here plus the capital you spend are the two components of that 5% FinCom policy. So there's no real objective, but you can see it's sort of steady at the $2 to $2.5 million level, for quite some time. And again, you saw the new projects are not that many. And you can also see what the schedule of debt that exists and when it will run off. Nothing too interesting. So that's a picture of kind of debt and capital for the general fund. I showed you some of the water enterprise specific issues, so I'm not going to really go into it, but there's a couple pages and you can see these are the debt authorizations that November town meeting is being asked for in water. Smart meters further down the road, and so on with stormwater as well as sewer. So I don't know if there's any specific questions or areas you want to discuss. I'm happy to discuss the capital plan. There are some requests for November. If you prefer, we could certainly discuss those now instead of waiting for the warrant. Ed?
Yeah, open it up to the committee. And anybody have any questions or first off? I'm looking through if anyone's raising. I don't see anyone to raise their hand, but obviously. And then just out to FinCom as well, to Bob's second point. Then would folks go ahead, Jane?
Oh no, you can finish your thought.
Well, I was going to say, if we had a preference, if we wanted to talk about the warrant articles, the pieces that are part of the warrant articles now, or if we wanted to that was the other piece. Just if anyone had any thoughts on that last comment from Bob.
And just to remind you, kind of a teaser for 2 weeks from now, this is a really important question for FinCom to weigh in on, is how much debt and capital do you want to put in the beginning operating budgets, I guess I'll say, as we go through the budget season. It's too soon for me to give you a real clear picture of the operating budgets. And honestly, with all the uncertainty about federal estate aid, that may never change. But I am very sure that as you see what happens in 2 weeks, you will be very uncomfortable with the low operating budget. It's not zero. We're going to be looking at something like 2% and maybe something a little higher than that. So that any relaxation of the debt schedule and the operating budgets, if you will, would be very helpful, I'm sure, for the superintendent and myself. And that's especially true if in the operating budgets for next year, we want to continue to fund some sort of PPE or COVID expenditure. But that's for 2 weeks. That's from 2 weeks from now.
Ed, my questions actually center on this page. Would it be okay if I ask them since this page is up?
Of course, yeah, please.
Okay. Actually, yeah, Bob, if you can just go back down just a few little clicks to where you just were. Yeah, perfect. I have, I think, 2 or 3 questions on this. So the non-funded capital priorities, you've got the 10 million on one side and the no total cost estimates on the other. Can you remind me what triggers a debt exclusion versus what you would anticipate doing within the levy?
FinCom has a policy, and the round number is 5 million or more. It might be a little less. It's actually based on debt service, so it depends on interest rates. But as a rule of thumb, just say 5 million.
Okay. So generally speaking, the non-funded ones would look like debt exclusions and the smaller ones under.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, okay. It seems like it was shaking out that way. I have a question on the comment you just made about the guidance for capital and debt and the impact on operating budgets. I'm wondering if, from your opinion, if we were to say cut the percentage of capital and debt, do we sort of create a new baseline moving forward? So for instance, I know with free cash, and it might be different, but with free cash, you know, you set a higher level of free cash, and that's the new baseline for next year. So I guess a concern I would have about, and to your exact point, it would have to be weighed against what the actual operating budgets look like and what the impact was. But if we were to say cut to a new standard that's something below 5%, would that be something that realistically would have to be carried forward? Because if you said, oh, well, only for 1 year, but the next year we'll move it back to 5%, that would have to come out of the operating budget, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's an important question. Some of us in the room, and I'm looking at Chuck and I, go back far enough that we remember capital plans that had less than $200,000 a year total. And, you know, the buildings were falling apart.
Yeah.
And it was because primarily some of the elementary school construction was done inside the levee, and it just crowded out everything else. Plus, there was, you know, money directed at operating budgets. So certainly there's a red caution flag that you never want to do that if you can help it. So that anything that you discuss that's less than 5%, there's two parts to. One is, can we make a permanent change? Can we lower it to some amount that seems sustainable permanently as far as we can tell? Or two, if it's not permanent, how low are we willing to go and for how long on a temporary basis? And I don't think there's enough information to make a comment on the long term right now. You know, last year when things were pretty stressful in June and in the spring, we cut it to just above 4%, and that seems somewhat drastic, you know, almost $800,000, $900,000 less.
Yeah.
So, you know, is 4% a good baseline? I don't know. Again, the capital plan, absent whatever comes into it, is in good shape. So certainly, you know, I've given you a balanced capital plan for this year and next year. Well, for next year, I am sure we could find some of the projects and push them out another year, or push them out to next November town meeting when we see a better financial, you know, picture, when we have better news, better information. So I would be reluctant to you know, for FinCom to restate their 5% policy as a policy.
Yeah.
I think FinCom and the rest of us just need to be a little bit flexible for the next couple of years and sort of see how things go, and just be mindful that it's really easy to give up on capital because of all the other expenses you see that are much more tangible and meaningful to most people. But you got to be real careful when you let capital slide. Yeah,
I really appreciate that. If I can ask, I think just one more question. I think I heard you. I just want to clarify that I heard it right. The smaller projects, the stadium turf, fieldhouse floors, Birch Meadow, did I hear you correctly that you feel that as those come online, the capital plan can absorb them? Because they're not funded right now, and I'm not sure if that means that we don't know where the funding is going to come from, or
Right.
Are you confident that over time we can find that in the capital plan, assuming 5%?
A year or two ago, there was discussion about you know, things that are kind of optional or nice to have, and all of these fell under that. So I listed them outside. You know, if these numbers are all right, there's $12 million of capital we could put back in the capital plan. So we could absolutely find a way to put 10 million on a planning document. But you can see it's not for a few years. You know, it's out here somewhere. So it's really a question of what are the priorities of, you know, the various boards and ultimately town meeting.
Might be just a smidge outside the purview of FinCom, but I tend to agree with you. It would be ideal, I think, if those could be put into the capital plan, even if they're a few years out, just and to your exact point, based on priority and ability to fund. That's something that we maybe want to think about. Thanks, Bob. That was very helpful.
You bet.
can I ask a question,
Of course.
Ed? So Bob, as we go through this, and I don't think it applies to this, what we're looking at now, but as we go through the presentation in the packet, could you highlight anything that might long-term, because capital expense is a long-term planning component. The other long-term planning component is just your ability to borrow for these debt exclusions. And what are auditors and people that decide what it's going to cost the town to borrow for a debt exclusion when they price that risk and they put a number on it in addition to prevailing interest rates that we don't control? What are the things that we do control within our town budgeting process that may affect, if anything, the interest rate at which we could borrow for a killam or something like that when we choose to do that capital work?
Some of us just got off a call an hour or so ago, and one of the speakers was Julie Thurlow of Reading Cooperative. And in her words, we're heading to 0% interest rate world. So that doesn't mean we could borrow at 0%, but it does mean that interest rates would appear to be low for quite some time. So there's no certainty about anything, but it would be surprising if interest rates went up in the next year or two. And
the Fed said 2023 for their part of it, which
and generic interest rates are the most important driver of what our costs are, as opposed to anything we can do. But behind that, the way I look at it is the Feds are pumping out a lot of free cash, and there's a cost to that. There's inflation down the road. It could be 3 years, it could be 5 years, but unless you just devalue your currency dramatically, there's inflation, there's interest rates that are going to be higher. So sorry,
one more point. Are there assumptions in these projections about interest rates in how you've assigned
for the debt schedule, for the money not yet borrowed? I've actually cut the assumption from 4% to 3% over the last 6 months or so. And we've been borrowing less than that. So that's still a little bit conservative. If we were to borrow for 25 or 30 years now for, let's say, a killam, I think we do it in the twos somewhere, less than 3%. So it historically very attractive rates. I mean, many of you probably see what refinancing of housing mortgages are. It's just historic lows. So it's not a bad time to borrow. And conversely, you've heard from Sharon, it's not a good time to have cash to invest. Interest rates are so low. So in terms of what the rating agencies look at, generally speaking, our debt profile is low and it's short. We don't like to borrow for long term, so it's attractive. So they view it as positive. How they'll view organizations after COVID or during COVID, I haven't a clue.
Any other questions for Bob as it relates to capital and what he's gone over so far, capital and debt? You don't have to raise your hand anymore.
All right, I've got a quick question. Bob, you mentioned that operating budgets will be tight, which you alluded to in our last financial forum, so I don't think that's news to anybody. Can you ascribe how much of that is based on COVID and how much of it is based on some other circumstances? Is it predominantly being driven by COVID, the tightness in the operating budgets, or is it driven by something else?
Yeah, it's entirely driven by COVID. I would say if we didn't have COVID expenses and loss of revenues, we'd be up in the 3.25% area where, historically we're comfortable being 3.5%, 3.25%.
So I'm having a gut reaction. So just sort of for my colleagues on the FinCom, my gut reaction to that is if the operating budgets are squeezed because of a one-time event, COVID, that we do anticipate will be over at some point in the near future, a year, 6 months, 2 years, not 10 years or 20 years, right? Like some period of time. To me, that argues potentially for an additional use of free cash that we very clearly say the expectation is that revenues will be up and those extraordinary expenses will be down at some point in the future. So I wonder if you couldn't ratchet back the use of free cash more easily than you could cutting the capital percentage. So that's just sort of where my head's at right now, just to share my thinking.
And just maybe following on that, when you say it's, all of it's COVID related, that relates back to aid, state aid, and what, all of that's all intertwined, right, Bob?
Yeah, I mean, it's hit state aid, although so far the state's done a miraculous job of holding it at least steady, and very much hit our local revenues. And then, obviously added some costs.
Yeah, Gina, I definitely, I think that's a, kind of a spot on, observation.
Want me to go ahead and jump into the warrant?
Yeah, let's do that. Yep, I think that's great, Bob. Appreciate it. Unless anyone has any final questions on this piece, we can just jump ahead. I don't see any hands. Green light, you can go.
Okay, so Article 3, let me just check. Yep. Article 3 is changing the capital plan. And these are new requests, so definitely FinCom should vote. Again, the changes to the capital plan don't spend money, but without doing this, you can't spend money on capital. Between the town and the schools, we sort of put our heads together and came up with this list. It's, as you can see, just short of $250,000. The first item is $90,000 for ALS defibrillators. The chief's here if you want to ask him questions. The main comment is, had he known this in May or June, he could have paid for all this with surplus funds from a fire truck purchase. He had $100,000 he turned back to free cash on June 30th. So the timing just wasn't ideal. But this single item, to me, raises to the priority list, to the top of the list. Then there's, I guess, two somewhat related issues, the two DPW issues. One is to get a hot box. That's something that allows DPW to do winter pothole repairs. It's pretty much what it sounds like. And then the second part, which I know I mentioned at Junetown meeting, is we cut $50,000 out of the skim coat crack seal budget and said we'll probably be back in November to restore the second $50,000 during the last 6 months of the year. And in fact, we would like to do that. We had also suggested a trimming of $50,000 in another sidewalk related issue, and town meeting actually added that back in November. So we really are okay in sidewalks, never ideal. And then lastly, this issue here, $50,000, used to be two $40,000 pieces. Both Simon's Way and Camp Curtis, I guess I'll say, are in the same watershed, which I learned a couple weeks ago. I hadn't thought of it. Conscom is very interested in working on this as a project, I guess I'll say. The needs are different. Before we bought Simon's Way a year or two ago, we got a wetland scientist who flagged the property. Our Conscom conservation agent has also walked the property, and that's not needed. So, the property is well flagged. But one of the things that is needed is I guess more paperwork. The ownership, the parcel layout of that does not line up with wet and dry. It's just random. And, if we want to, for instance, give the wetlands to conservation, which seems appropriate to me, it would be far better to give them a new parcel by itself they can have the whole thing. And then to have the remaining parcel, probably as a single piece, probably doesn't matter, as buildable. This is the dry piece, and then the community can have a discussion. How does it want to use it? Does it want to use it at all? So there's legal work involved, and we'll see what else happens along the way. Camp Curtis is a very different issue. First off, it's state land, so it's not clear to me exactly how we'll proceed. But for those that didn't hear, I was able to visit the state last January before the world got mad. And the governor was very generous with his time and with his staff. The Adjutant General of the National Guard was there. And they made a startling presentation about why they wanted Reading to be involved in this land, and Wakefield. We were both there. There's a parcel that they are very much interested in us being on, I guess I'll say. And their reason was for their own security. They thought that the parcel would be far better if it was occupied by us than the way it's used now, for their own transparency and security. Now, the real challenge is, and I'm sure they knew this and had the tongue in the cheek when they said it, is a lot of the land is wet. So we do need a wetland scientist to go out and flag that property. And that's something that conservation would be highly involved with and would run, basically. And then the trick at the end of the day, and it's really up to conservation, I'll certainly work with them, is to have a discussion about, all right, here's the facts. What are we willing to move around? We've had this discussion with the administrator down at the Walkersbrook area, and we've, at least on paper, redesigned a much better water flow wetland system that would be far better than what's there. But it does involve moving some things around so that, you know, some current wetland would become dry and vice versa. So these two pieces together, you know, would be looked at holistically by Conscom in terms of, okay, you know, here's some land up here we're acquiring that we can preserve. And, you know, maybe we have some flexibility in the Camp Curtis area. So that's the theory behind this. I think it's really important that the town make a statement through town meeting that it's interested in Camp Curtis enough to vote this. Whether we spend money and how we spend money, I don't know yet. I have not approached DCAM. DCAM is the financial agency that was, you know, also present at this meeting that would be in charge of how money is spent on the property, I'll say. And you know, it'll be easy to work with them, and I'm sure we'll work something out. But I know what work needs to be done, but I can't specify exactly how it will happen. So these are both sort of planning, you know, planning money for land use in the future. For the next year, to balance the budget, it was too high. First of all, we moved $260,000 of debt service out because downtown improvements phase 2 is just not, it has to be slower. COVID slowed it down a year anyways. And then we changed the Birch Meadow parking lot improvements out a year. I just don't think we want to be in or near schools right now until, you know, the schools say everything's fine. And they say, we're going to have a normal summer. You can go do work at Birch Meadow. So moving that out seemed appropriate. And then there's a couple of other, you know, we replaced this funding, a couple of other relatively small items, plus and minus. So that's the changes in capital that would go to town meeting and FinCom would be asked to vote on. There is no other changes immediately in FY21 for any of the enterprise funds. There is a change in the debt that I mentioned that'll come up later in the warrant. And there is a preferred increase in next year's budget of an additional $25,000 that would go in the capital plan. And again, not be appropriated till next July. So that's Article 3. Ed, would you prefer me to continue on, or does FinCom want to stop and talk about it and vote on it?
I'll kind of put it out to everybody else. I'm fine either way. I'm fine to discuss it right now. I mean, there are the one thing I will say, there are a few other here ones that I think have a little bit of meat in them. So if we want to talk about it while it's fresh, this might be the right way to do it. But I'm happy to have Bob move on to whatever else might.
You know, one thing I could do is Article 4, so you can see whether you're comfortable with this piece of capital. You see what else is going on, maybe.
Yeah, let's go do that. Sure.
So Article 4 is changing the current year's budget, and there's and again, I would ask that the FinCom vote on this. So last week or 2 weeks ago, you will recall there was this amount of extra revenues, if you will, and I'm trying to think if anything changed. I don't think so. I think it's the same number you saw before. And then the question was, what do we do with, you know, $800,000? Certainly a nice question to have. And here's all the sources that we discussed previously, both up and down. Primarily state aid is driving this. So here are all the suggested increases that, oh, by coincidence, just happen to add up to that amount. It was just easy to show it. I'm actually going to start with all the COVID-related costs that John and I and others talked about. We'd like to request $25,000 in the administrative services budget for COVID expenses. This is a line we did not fund at June town meeting, and we have recorded expenses against it. So the way the town budget works, PPE is all in facilities, but there are other non-PPE costs that could be in any department, and we've incurred some in administrative services. We've only incurred $3,000 or $4,000, but that's one item. Board of Health is certainly related, although it's more than just COVID. We're requesting $50,000 for wages. We added $30,000 last June. I just spent a couple hours with the current vice chair talking about these. The $20,000 is meant to do a study of the division and get a recommendation for how to improve staffing long term. And the short term is a need right now. Now, I can't identify $50,000 of a need, but this would definitely carry them through the end of the year.
And Bob, and so for that one, is that 50,000 to add staff, or is it, or
it's probably to add staff, whether it's permanent staff or temporary. You know, we talked about it that, you know, the medical impact of COVID is of some amount of months or years. When a majority of us think COVID is over, the health division and certainly mental health services will still have a lot of business, even when COVID is over. So I would view this $50,000 as probably being permanent and probably being staffing. Now, it's possible that depending on the result of this here, we may later want to move at April town meeting some of this 50 into this. So for instance, if you want to just hire out contracted services in the town budgets, we need to do that through expenses. So rather than hiring a part-time inspector, if they want to hire a small inspecting firm, for instance, that could be an expense. But for now, the desire is to plan to have additional hours in the division of some type.
Gotcha.
The 20,000 you could say is COVID related. It's a staffing study. I don't know, but we've certainly uncovered shortfalls in staffing, because of COVID. We knew some of it last winter, but we didn't understand the magnitude of it. Now we understand. Very clear. This rubbish is a COVID result. Jane is just seeing increased volumes of rubbish, and it's because more people are home. There was an amazing spring cleaning, I understand, in Reading. People suddenly were home. They did a nice job. I believe she told me that the run rate right now is $125,000 over, but we figure some of that must be one time. Don't know. So it seemed like putting 75 in the budget probably will take us through this year. And then, we don't really know what's the right baseline for this budget in the future. If people are going to start spending more time at home and working at home, these are the kinds of impacts we're going to see. And again, this is a large budget. This is a $600,000 or $700,000 budget. So, it's a 10% increase, but it's not an enormous increase, I guess I'll say.
And Bob, as it relates to kind of rubbish just in general, and obviously I'm guilty as charged. The house is a lot cleaner from the spring, but could this also be again, regardless of whatever the dynamic could be, is there an expectation, and I don't know how far down the line that that whether it's recycling or things of that nature where that we were expecting kind of greater expense anyways?
We had a meeting with our rubbish hauler, I want to say it was late fall. Pre-COVID, the industry was a mess. We have a really attractive long-term 10-year contract at 3% a year. But more important than that, we need to have a vendor who stays in business. It's good on paper, but we can't have them walk away. So they were definitely having some financial stress last winter, and I have no idea what's happened since. They're just trying to survive. The pressures were largely in the recycling markets, where they used to be able to sell off recycling, and now they have to pay to get rid of recycling. And in Massachusetts, there's only, I think, one area where you can send your recycling to be burned. And that's a tremendous problem within the state, because the lines have started to get 4 and 5 hours long. And as a result, that's just more costs to municipalities. So, I was ready to ask our state delegation for help last fall or last winter. And now there's just no way to know kind of what the state is. So, we have seen vendors walk away from contracts with other municipalities. That happened in Stoneham. If you ever want to hear from your constituents, as it were, don't pick up the trash and see how long that goes, especially in the summer.
Right.
So to scramble to replace this would be very, very difficult. So we've done a good job working with the vendor. It's just so hard to know right now what's the state of the market, but it could be a concern. That's why the 75,000, I think, should be viewed as probably permanent, because maybe it'll be needed for some of these other things, even if the volume slowed down.
Yep.
The last two pieces are facilities and schools. Facilities needs $20,000 in overtime due to COVID. That's 4 employees. You can imagine how much they're working. The facilities town buildings, the custodial staff is also 4 employees, same thing, just put in enormous hours. And then this $200,000 request is largely for PPE. So we originally put $75,000 in the June budget. We also have grant funding available and federal funding available. That's a very complex area. It appears right now that we have more funds available than we've spent through December, at least. The big wild card that I think you heard about last week is right now there's no federal money for schools or the town that goes past December 30th. And so this is a hedge against, if there is no agreement in Washington and no further federal assistance, the facilities department, and then down here you see the school department with 120,000, should be in reasonable shape, at least through April town meeting, if not for the rest of the year. So these figures were definitely higher than what we were talking about and originally thinking about. But in order to sort of build in a level of comfort, and honestly, because there was money available and it just happened to round off that way, we did put in more COVID money than maybe we had anticipated. And this is probably a good time to bring up that when again John Gale and Sharon and I met, there's just so much uncertainty. There's uncertainty about magnitude. There's uncertainty about timing. It's really hard to kind of take your best shot. Depending on how things work out in Washington, and depending on how things work out with the Massachusetts state budget, which they've now said will happen after the election, I hope. There could be any number of curveballs thrown at us financially, good and bad. I think it's prudent to go forward with some kind of a plan like this that's generally flexible, but we may well need to call a special town meeting at the end of January, the beginning of February, based on what news we find out federally and from the state. So that this COVID money seems to give us a pretty good cushion. And again, the federal monies that are available, the CARES Act money through December, and then some school grants directly, seem to be adequate right now. What happens when the federal money changes its rules and says, well, we can't really repay you that? And we just need to be flexible. So I just wanted to bring up the possibility that, you know, we may need a special town meeting simply because of COVID costs. And it would be a shame, but, you know, after talking about it, we all felt a lot better with that possibility instead of needing to wait till April when something might be very, very difficult to deal with financially. The schools have the advantage of having a bottom line budget, but depending on order of magnitude, that's not going to help them. If it's a big number and a big problem, you know, that's going to need more urgent help before April town meeting. And then kind of in a sidecar with that, when you think about what I just said is the current year, what about next year? When are we going to know state aid? When are we going to know COVID funding? We're not going to know. So I also want to at least raise the possibility that our annual town meeting, you know, we could certainly begin on time if health allows. We may want to consider adjourning to May or June to wait to vote a budget like we did last year. I have no idea if that would be beneficial, but at least I just want to say out loud that that's a possibility. To the extent that the state doesn't have a budget on October 7th for the current year, what are they going to do for next year? I'm sure they haven't even thought about it.
Okay.
You know, they're trying to survive. So, and then the last item that I skipped over or I guess there's two. One is a local share. Greg got a great, you know, almost a $90,000 grant for some important equipment. We just have to pay a 10% local share. And then property casualty, I think Sharon mentioned previously, is up 50,000. And there's the debt, you know, 250,000. So that gives you more of a complete picture. And I would definitely say that, you know, this was almost, you know, we have 800,000, how can we spend it? As opposed to usually we're like, what do we really need? And that's all. You know, we definitely put in higher COVID numbers because this balanced. It's absolutely up to FinCom. You don't like that approach. I have no problem with lowering some of the COVID numbers and maybe changing some of the others because you want to use less free cash. You know, I have no problem with that. I just know it's a time to have some cushion and some flexibility just because there's so much uncertainty. Again, nothing in enterprise funds other than just to note that this project, which comes up later, has been increased from $1 million to $1.1 million. So that sums up these two current year articles.
So I'm sure this is where we kind of left off last week. And I know there's, you know, we kind of tabled some stuff and so, and I know this was, we wanted to be able to use the time to digest some of this. So I appreciate, you know, you kind of, you know, giving us a little bit more as it relates to the work, I guess, and I'll open up to everybody, you know, as far as anyone within FinCom or anyone else that has any questions. But the first one, and you mentioned the word cushion a couple times. And so, and I kind of jotted it down because I only thought you were going to mention it once, but you mentioned it a few more. But like, would you like? And again, I think these are, you know, you've have these kind of cushions built in as it relates to COVID, and you know, and not to have you kind of go into too deep as far as what the method behind it. But were there other areas where you could have or thought of, you know, kind of applying a cushion, or was it, you know, this just the most, you know, kind of obvious one that kind of leapt off the page? And, you know, obviously I know there's a lot behind it. And that's kind of what, you know, there's a lot of, you know, kind of different pieces. And I just didn't know if there was anything else that was just outside of the cut that, you know, that you might have looked at, or, you know, you and Dr. Doherty might have looked at and said, oh, well, you know, put that in scope or put that out of scope.
Yeah, there were certainly more capital requests than what seemed appropriate. You know, there's never any shortage of capital requests. We could have come up with another $400,000 easily. And that is, you know, now comfortably sitting in the next year capital plan. So, you know, no worries. I can think of one other issue on the town side. There's been some retirements in the library, and so they're going to need some funding, assuming the rest of their budget, you know, would proceed as expected. But Amy and I chatted about it, and she had no problem waiting till Springtown meeting, you know, see how things work. presumably they will need funding, but you never know. There were some other smaller requests, or at least in my mind, less important, that didn't really raise to the level of, well, if we don't do this in November, we'll really regret it. Some kind of a planning study or whatever, respectfully. COVID was really kind of front and center, aside from capital and a couple of these other expenses. Now, we didn't sit down and price out exactly what material we might need in COVID. That's too hard. We have a good stockpile. Again, we have access to federal money. This just really is in case, what happens if the federal money all goes away as it's supposed to on December 30th? What amounts, 200,000 of the facilities budget is meant for both school and town buildings. There certainly is going to be an increased cleaning cost, especially for the schools. If they're going to continue in-building sessions throughout the rest of the year, the outsourced cleaning bill is going to be quite high. And, there's some discussion with Gail and John about, do you want to add money into the school building budget or just something a little more generic like this $120,000 line item? And for now, that seemed appropriate because then they can much more easily move money around, as they need to, without needing town meeting. And then on the town side, the cleaning of buildings is not as, I guess, unknown, because the buildings are used except for the Pleasant Street Center. And there is a certain amount of cleaning, far more than in the past. And some of it is done by staff, but some of it is contracted out. And again, Joe believes he can handle that easily through that $200,000 figure. So that I'd say cleaning a building is probably the biggest single expense. And then behind it is PPE, not knowing what we'll need. But I don't imagine many of you have walked through the schools or the town buildings, but facilities just did a phenomenal job. You're reading headlines that are scary from other cities and towns, and it's just not true in Reading. They've done a really, really nice job, as I would expect.
Any questions from members?
I have a question on this page. Sort of a red flag for me is increasing operating costs, right? And so I'm specifically looking at the healthcare staffing issue. Most of these COVID expenses are clearly one time, but this is potentially, to your point, Bob, a permanent increase in staffing and employee costs. And I'm imagining a challenge, and you alluded to it, is how do you figure out whether the COVID crisis revealed inadequate staffing that does need to be permanently addressed, or created staffing that when the COVID crisis is over, maybe won't be as extreme. And so I don't really want to get into that nitty gritty because I think it's outside our purview, but I'm wondering, to make me comfortable voting for this, could you talk a little bit about the staffing evaluation and how you're going to get at kind of some of those questions? Is that a clear question?
Yeah, but unfortunately, the answer is not as clear. You're right. The items here that seem to be recurring, this I've highlighted, and let's just say I'm expecting it to be. We don't really know. Property and casualty could be recurring. We talked about rubbish. We just don't know. The good thing is nothing else hopefully is recurring. So $800,000 is a lot. But maybe only 100,000 or a little bit more is recurring. The 20,000 is going to identify the 50,000. So until it does, I'm pretty comfortable saying the 50,000 will be spent on temporary help, not permanent help. Right now, for instance, we've had a part-time public health nurse position advertised since June or July. We haven't had a single resume, not one. Everyone wants the same skill set right now. So again, it's going to take a little creativity to figure out how to attract part-time help during a pandemic and possibly outsource some of the stuff. So I think in the winter budget process, we'll have a better way to identify kind of what a solution looks like that's a little longer term. But that's a good 2 months away. And it's not to say I don't expect to see the results of the study in 2 months, but I think I'll have a better sense of, you know, what's a different baseline than today, and then let the study perhaps fill in more over time. What we've done in the past for different departments, and health happened 5-6 years ago, is, you know, we can sort of identify with the Board of Health's help some obvious needs now that a study is going to tell you. And then we just leave for the future in year 2, in year 3, in year 5, here's some other things. So that's how the last study went. So we implemented some immediate things, and honestly, we never ended up doing the rest. You know, the Board of Health turned over and had, you know, different objectives. So I can't give you a solid answer as to how much of the 50 is permanent, but I think we should treat it as permanent because that's the conservative way to look at it. But we will not spend it on a permanent basis until we have much better facts than we have today. But you shouldn't be surprised if the budget in the winter, you know, identifies, by the way, here's how we're going to spend it. You know, I don't know that, but I want to prepare you for that. And, you know, we don't like to spend money, so, you know, we won't spend it frivolously.
I do know that. 2 quick follow-ups on that. I assume that this staffing evaluation will be done by some outside expert, not somebody internally. And
Correct.
second question, yes?
Yes.
Yeah. And then the second one is, I imagine and would hope that there's some, I was just about to say competitive analysis, but that's not really the right word, I guess, in the public sector, but peer
Definitely,
community.
it's a peer community comparison, yes.
Excellent. So they're going to be looking at other communities that are like Reading and seeing what kind of staffing they have, what does health services do, and we'll be able to sort of see where we line up. That's excellent. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I visited half a dozen communities that are larger than us just to get a sense. One of them had 16 employees. I'm still shaking my head over that. Some of them are part-time.
Wow.
You know, we have 2 full-time, 1 or 2 part-time. Well, it depends how you count. But ours is much smaller. So, you know, we're very reluctant to take on FTEs when we can't identify a longer-term need for staff.
Bob, is there anything in the world of town managers that would let you benchmark some of these staffing levels or approaches among all the 300 some, you know, towns and cities? I guess just towns, it's 180, 200, but there's a lot of comparison points. I'm assuming there's an association of town managers or something like that?
Yeah, they don't do that, though.
Too bad.
They mostly complain.
Yeah. Everybody
You know,
can do that.
One thing I learned early, which surprised me, is in the schools, you have such good data statewide, tremendous data. I know of 3 different vendors who attempted to do that on the town side and just all gave up. They just said, you're all crazy. You know, we all classify things differently. We call things differently. You know, the state didn't impose on us the things that imposed on the schools to report this way. If the state would have done that, we could do the kind of benchmark work you're thinking about. But we can certainly and have looked at staffing levels. You know, what are your FTEs? What do they do? What are they called? What do they earn? What kind of money do you spend expense money on? So I do expect that, but it won't be like you're used to seeing in schools. It won't be as crisp or as thorough. You know, we do the best we can with our 25 odd peer communities to get data. And again, not every community does things the same way. Some health divisions, for instance, would include our substance abuse prevention effort. You know, there's 2 more FTEs that if you didn't ask the right question, it would look different. So we definitely expect to have some aspect of quantitative to this, but it won't be robust.
Ed, could I jump in for a sec?
Yeah, Mark, I thought I was getting ready to go on.
Thanks. Just to amplify some of Bob's points and to answer, I think, some of your questions, Gene, also. Some of the issues regarding the health department, there have been recommendations dating back to January of this year, so pre-COVID. indicating some additional needs that already existed. COVID obviously amplifies this even further, but even in the absence of COVID, there has been quite a bit of discussion about whether it's a structural change, which it probably is, but more activity going on in health than we're able to currently manage in the health department. And the Board of Health obviously has gone through quite a bit of turmoil over the last, I guess we're in October, so nine or so months, partially because there was just so much to do. Again, pre-COVID as well as in COVID. So I think the select board last night spent a lot of time talking about this also. There is a clear need for more help, more activity in the department. What it is specifically, again, Bob is working with the Board of Health and doing benchmarking and other things also to address it. But I wanted to answer your question about, gee, is this a temporary need and it's really COVID specific? And I think we're pretty clear that there's already a substantial need that isn't being taken care of, and COVID has made it even bigger and even more to deal with.
Thanks, Mark.
And there may be, sorry if I jump in here, the other thought, Gene, too, I think I agree with your thinking on this about kind of seeding operational expenses in response to a temporary condition, right? What I'm hearing, and others can jump in, what I'm hearing from the net comments is that there was perhaps a strain in some points within this part of our staffing. COVID's made it more acute. The other thing we have to think about is that while the epidemiological disease spread portion of COVID may be 1 or 2 years, there could be lingering effects for quite a while. We just don't know. So I'm not opposed to supporting the proposal on the health staffing side for operational reasons. If it was another area, I might feel differently, but I just think that human lives is just something where I'd rather round up and be overstaffed. In this particular area, even I'd rather make the mistake high and overstaff with this than understaff, if we can staff at all, which is the hard part right now. So I as a general rule, I completely agree. In this particular instance, I'd favor the experts we have and following the recommendations. And if that's a little bit of higher operational burn rate, I'll take that risk instead of the other way around and having some post-COVID recurring need in our community that we didn't foresee, and now we're trying to scramble to compete with all the other communities that have the same needs. So.
Yeah, I think you're
That
right.
makes a lot of sense.
You end up just kind of kicking the can. If there is something lingering at that point and you didn't have it now, then how much worse would it be? Fast forward 6 months, 9 months, whatever, a year, whatever that is. Sorry, yeah, I got you.
No, I was just saying that I thought Nick's comments made a lot of sense. This has been a helpful discussion for me.
I don't know if it'd be helpful to hear from the schools on the COVID side.
Yeah, definitely.
John can get mad at me tomorrow.
I would have asked him. You just took it on my cue. You read my mind.
No, I could certainly talk about the school piece, and Gail can pipe in as well. The biggest X factor for us moving forward is the disinfecting and the cleaning. We have a pretty good number there of 120,000 that facilities and Gail have come up with, but that's going to be dependent on how frequent we're going to be able to be in person versus remote. But that's our most critical piece moving forward.
So John, that's more of a predictor versus like projecting an actual. It's not like you took what you did in so far in September and rounded it out. It's more because is what you predict when school schools are at capacity. Or maybe that's the question around that.
For some reason, I'm having trouble understanding you, Ed.
Sorry, am I breaking up?
Yeah, you're a little far away from the mic, maybe.
No, okay, sorry. No, I guess my question, John, was more of, was that 120 not based on an actual number and rolling it out in a series of months, but just more a prediction based upon when schools would be at full staff?
I could have, that's an actual number. I could actually have, I can have Gail speak to it more, but that's an actual number, assuming we're going to be in person for the rest of the year.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that last May or June, when we were putting this together, none of us imagined that we would need to prepare for a whole fiscal year of significant change. And now I think we all realize we should prepare for that. Whether it happens or not, let's hope it doesn't.
Any other questions from the group? Mark.
Just one other question. So, Bob, at the last forum you went through, and you're looking at potential ways to either use the $700,000 or $800,000, or potentially use a reduction in free cash. What is the use of free cash in this now? So this is as FinCom had recommended. What is that number? Is that 1.8 or something like that?
That's just above 2 million. I think town meeting may have added a tiny bit, so it's like 2,080,000 or something like that.
Yeah, 2,082,000.
Thank you.
And one of the items I had presented 2 weeks ago that I just took away is OPEB. That can always happen in April. There's no magic about doing it now.
Any other questions, comments? Again, I know we had, to Mark's, kind of clarifying question, we'd had some, kind of back and forth about talking about free cash and, that $2 million number. And, I don't know if anyone had any, kind of further thoughts on, on that piece of it, or if there's, a piece of it that we just, don't need to address, given what Bob's outlined here.
I think just to throw it out there, you're going to have a lot of discussion about free cash in 2 weeks. The 2% type figure that I've sort of outlined, my recollection is that assumes 1.75 million of free cash is used. So if you want to do any, if those numbers are right, and they change, so you don't know, if you want to bump that up, you're going to be discussing free cash levels you've never discussed in an annual budget.
That's a good point.
But in fairness, Bob, don't we have free cash levels we've never had before?
Absolutely, no question.
Well, let's put that in context.
Yep. Yeah, good point.
The other point, Bob, that I want to just think about for the group is there's near-term unprecedented uncertainty, I think, with not just the health care, public health situation, but state aid, federal government. Like, there's a lot we don't know in this budget, right? So if we have a choice as a committee between leaving money in free cash or taking money out of free cash and putting it where we think it will do some work, okay? And we're wrong in that second estimate, right? We take money and we put it somewhere and allocate it in a budget, and it turns out it isn't needed, it isn't spent. It just goes right back into free cash, just regenerated, right? But if you leave it in free cash, it's not doing any work. Now the risk is that you spend it all, you know, regenerated. But historically, from what Sharon's gone over in the past, my sense is some of the free cash it seemed like it was roughly historically half and half, and I know we're in non-historical times, but there's free cash generated from growth, right? That, you know, the growth of revenues was higher than predicted. Maybe we don't count on that right now because of the circumstances. And there's free cash from unused allocated money. And so that's the thing that I'm thinking about for the committee to think about if our choice is between leaving it in free cash or putting it somewhere where it's available for doing work for the community, wherever that might be. There's the possibility that, like, I kind of feel like I'd rather right now, as general impressions, I'd rather aim too high and let the regeneration be higher in the allocated work than we might otherwise do, so that the money's available without another town meeting if it's needed in any of these areas, you know, in any of our line items. So that's where my head is right now. Again, I'm persuadable and open to other views, but that's something that's influencing my thinking.
So Nick, are you thinking about that in that context of just because of COVID versus, you know, not you know, kind of structurally overall, but just, you know, that thought process is on the basis of COVID?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things I'm pulling on here. So I do have a generalized, you know, allergic reaction to seeding operating costs with capital expense and with, you know, kind of expanding without thought, right? Like, oh, we have this need now, and then after the need's gone, you keep the cost. Like that as a general rule is an area that I'm very cautious about. But I mean, also to another point I have in my mind, something Mark said last meeting or 2 meetings ago about, you know, well, maybe Mark, I hope I'm not misquoting you, but I remember Mark saying, maybe want to ride a little bit higher, thinking about a higher range of free cash that we might ordinarily be allocating in the budget, because we have no idea what state aid is. We have no idea what federal aid is going to be. We have no idea what the public health situation is going to be. We don't even have the cleaning budget, right, for the schools, if you want to get granular, right? We have experts making their best guesses across every one of these line items with often little or no history to rely on. And so I don't know. I want to be a good steward of the public funds that we're working with here, but I also want to serve the public well when we do that. And so if we have an extra FTE here for, you know, something that, you know, with the best of intentions we thought would help the public or the schools in some way, like I said, I'd rather round up and regenerate cash if it's something like we have a position we don't hire anybody. I'd rather at least try if there's a need. So that's what I'm thinking is I don't have a business as usual mindset in this upcoming year.
Well, and I think the part of it where I you know, kind of agree with that thinking, and, you know, and I just, you know, if the process of regeneration happens in normal times, then the process of, you know, then why wouldn't the process of regeneration, you know, it's more based on philosophy and the people that are employing that philosophy, you know, as far as, you know, the numbers that they've even put through here, you know, so if it doesn't hit, then it gets, you know, it gets regenerated. It's more of a philosophical, you know, how they employ that versus, you know, I just have more faith, you know, from in how Bob, Sharon, and Dr. Doherty and Gail have done that historically. That's put us in this position that we're in now. And so the fact that they're making the same set of judgments around these COVID-related expenses and these in this extraordinary time, that's the part of it that you know, gives me the same, you know, kind of comfort around that. Even though I'm with you, I want to serve the, you know, the you know, and steward the dollars, but also want to serve the public well. I just think this is one of those things where you can, you know, kind of stand behind that, you know, the judgment that's been made in the past.
Yeah, I have no problem with relying on our experts in this situation. It's the best guess we have. The the piece that kind of frightens me as just a local community in general is that it's the political uncertainty laid on top of the public health uncertainty right now in this year. And we just don't know. The differences are so extreme depending on how things go in November and January and at different points along the way in state government. We just don't know so much. And we are in a position to, I think, help our citizens. We're very fortunate position with the free cash position we have. And so to me, I don't see this as, I have a very different view right now than I would have a year ago and that I may have in the future. But right now, I'm worried about I'm not worried about it. I just really want to protect our people. And I feel like putting the money to work in the hands of the functional heads who are closest to the people that we serve is a good thing. And I'm not saying I'm not advocating anything drastic here. I'm just saying, like, in general, given just a little bit, like, I don't mind being on the high end of free cash. I'm not saying we go spend all the free cash. Absolutely not. But within ranges that make sense and are justifiable and make a lot of, like I said, if I'm going to miss, I'd rather miss a little bit on the high side and regenerate more if we allocate and we don't need whatever. And let's rely on our experts in the different functional areas because we need their help.
Yeah, and to your point, I don't see anything in here that's drastic.
No, I don't either.
Yeah, that's the point.
I think this is in some ways a modest ask. I know it's $837,000. I never thought I'd say that. Honestly, people were wondering who I am. But given the what I'm seeing on the volunteer side, helping people in the community kind of separately, and the need that is very much in Reading of people that are on hard times because of one-time unique occurrences traceable to COVID and the economic distress. There's need, and I've seen it, and I don't want to be kind of what is the term? Penny wise, pound foolish, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Which means we don't stop we don't let our buildings crumble, we don't let our roads fall apart, although the state helps us with that. But also, I'm fine with the asks on this page. I guess the question is this the right amount? Is there anything else we can do to help our teams, Bob, John, everybody else, that isn't on here that we should consider? I think that's where I'm going. So thanks, I've talked a lot, but I'm interested in other views.
Well, I guess I'll just add that when I got here, it was clearly time to start, I guess I'll say, saving money and not spending money and being more efficient. But at some point along the way, in the last 5 years or so, I suddenly realized, kind of like what you're saying now, is that, money in the bank isn't necessarily helping the taxpayer. They're paying taxes for services. Now, a certain amount of money in the bank is prudent. It's to protect the town and to protect those residents. Where do you draw that line? Because again, money in the bank is in some ways is unproductive. It's not yielding a service. It's protecting things and maybe a future service. So that's when I really said, okay, we must have enough free cash that now I'm a little more comfortable, and I can start thinking the way you just described. I agree that, as long as there's a conservative backdrop to your thinking always, that doesn't mean you don't spend money. The proverbial rainy day is here.
Well, and it's not our money, and that's what I always try to remember, is this is other people's money, and we've been, brought together here to do the people's work. So let's do it. We got to make the hard decisions.
And if I could just jump in really quickly, there are two components that make me comfortable with the line that this conversation is taking. One is we can focus on communication and why we're doing what we're doing and why the situation is unprecedented. So you can communicate that you're behaving in a way that may not be typical because you're in a circumstance that's atypical. So that is comforting to me and appropriate, I think. And secondly, we've talked about this, but I think that this is so overwhelmingly expense heavy, which is easier to pull out of the budget after the crisis versus wages. So I think those are two reasons why a higher level of free cash I could get very comfortable with, given the circumstances.
Anyone else in the committee? Any questions, comments? Not named Gene or Nick. Not that I don't love hearing from him. So, I mean, given that we've kind of gone over Article 3 and Article 4, do we want to just, kind of move forward and, on those two? And if so, do we want to entertain a vote?
Are you looking for a motion, Ed?
I think we're going to need a motion if we don't have any comments or any other questions. Yep. And Bob, we should just do these one, we don't need to, even though you talk 3 and 4 together, we need to do 3 and 4 separately, correct?
Unmuting yourself can be a challenge sometimes. Yeah, you should move to support Article 3 vote, and then I don't know how you want to handle reports to town meeting, but you can think about that.
Oh, yeah.
And then move on to Article 4.
Okay. Yeah, so let's if we're gonna, I'll entertain a motion on this one.
I'll make a motion to approve Article 3 as amended.
Is there a second?
I can second it, but where was the as amended part again? Did I miss that?
Did we? Or Bob, are we just saying that we're recommending this article as current?
I think Dan said his amended. Maybe he had an amendment in mind.
No, I was actually reading from the top line on that Article 3.
Oh, sorry. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, as presented, and then if someone offers amendments,
Gotcha.
so be it.
Should I correct that?
Yeah.
Please.
Move to approve Article 3 as presented.
I second.
Thanks, Marianne. All right, we'll go to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric, well, I'll go back to Eric. I don't hear him. Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marianne,
Yes.
Eric, back to you. I think you're the last one.
Eric just made a comment.
Can you hear me?
There he
Oh, I
is.
can hear you now. Yep.
Yes.
Thanks, Eric. And Ed is a yes. So we are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7, 0. That approves. And then so for Article 4. Do we want to entertain a motion for Article 4?
Move to approve Article 4 as presented.
A second?
Okay, second, yep.
I'm sorry, I talked over whoever that was. Who was that?
It was me, but it doesn't matter.
No, Marion, we'll take it.
Okay,
I want him on record.
all right, I
Okay,
second.
we'll move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric, Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
and Marianne.
Yes.
And Ed is a yes, that's 7-0. So, is it, do we have to, so I know you mentioned Article 6, Bob, is that the?
Yeah. Do you want to assign reports, or how do you want to handle that part of town meeting?
Yeah. For last town meeting, did Eric just do them?
I think so.
Maybe
Yeah.
we should have Eric do them again. No, yeah, I'm fine in the absence of that to just take it on as chair. I mean,
Okay.
I think that would. I mean, unless you think that, I'm afraid of it being a little. Again, I know it was our first run at kind of a virtual town meeting, but try to minimize the moving parts. It just might help. The whole process, but
Yeah.
I'm not married.
I think that's generally a good approach. We try to do the same.
Okay.
Article 5, there's no unpaid bills from prior years today, so we'll, there's no reason for you to vote on that, and then we'll kind of see on the floor at town meeting if anything is turned up. It wouldn't surprise me. Article 6 is the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And this is where the question is, there's nothing that's changed. As you can see here at your meeting last March 18th, you voted to support it, but you're certainly more than willing or you should have an opportunity to revote it. There's different members. It's entirely up to you.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Chair, this is Chuck Robinson. Can I interrupt and ask for a motion for the school committee to adjourn since there's no other school items?
Absolutely, Chuck. Sorry about that. I should have
Sorry.
back out to you guys both beforehand. My apologies.
That's okay. Does someone have a motion?
For the school committee to adjourn?
Second,
Carla?
yes.
Sean? John?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Chuck? Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Chuck, Mark, do you want to do the same? Sorry about that.
Select board members, do you want to duck out here?
If you think that's appropriate, sure.
Bob, is there anything else that you think we want to stay with?
I don't think so. I think the two articles that were done were the most important for, the other two elected boards.
Okay, great. I would entertain a motion, Carlo.
Motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn the joint meeting between the school committee, finance committee, and the select board.
I think you got to just adjourn us, actually.
Oh, sorry. Motion to adjourn the select board.
Second.
Second.
Was that Ann who chimed in?
Karen.
A second. Great. Okay, let me go through the roll. So Carlo,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Ann, Ann.
Yes.
Great. Vanessa
Yes.
and Mark. Yes. Thank you, folks.
Use the 90 minutes wisely.
Good.
Hey.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So yeah, getting back to the this Article 6. I just my take. I know we already voted as a committee, but given the new members and so forth, I would rather that we just did it again.
Yeah, and then just to go over the article briefly, Reading has a different approach to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It was created before there was a procedure to do this under the state. So, most communities, many communities use a formula with the state and don't need to bring this to town meeting every year. And they have a board of directors, for instance. So this is a little different to Reading. There's, as you can see, a balance of just under $400,000 in the fund. For money to be spent from the fund, it's a joint meeting of the select board and the Reading Housing Authority. And they haven't met in a few years now, but there have been times in the past when affordable units come up. And the question is, does the town wish to purchase them? But, with $400,000, there's not a lot of purchasing going to go on in the community right now. So this, this really isn't a heavily used, I guess I'll say, fund. But there has been discussion in the past of ways to create cash flow into the fund to make it more useful. And again, as of now, no money. I should add, as you can see in print, it's not just to buy affordable units. When Oak Tree came in down on Haven Street, they did get a vote of $200,000 from those two joint committees to help them afford affordable units, if you will. So that was pretty good leverage for the amount of affordable units that it brought in to use $200,000.
Thanks, Bob. Any discussion on this? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve Article 6 is written.
Thanks, Eric. Second.
I second.
Thanks, Mary Ann. Go to a vote. Dan?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Mary Ann?
Yes.
Ed? Yes. Passes 7-0.
Thanks. Now we come across a series of debt authorizations. The purpose is the same. The cost has been, the estimated cost has been increased. This is to serve a relatively small area town where the water pressure is very low, or I should say low, not very low. And this will improve that. One of the reasons there was some slight hesitation in moving this forward in the past was Wakefield has approved, I don't think they built yet, a 40B project just over the state line. I'm sorry, the town line in this area. And at one point they were discussing drawing their water from Reading. So until those discussions were finalized, we didn't want to make any improvements, but they decided to draw their water from Wakefield over 128 over a bridge. And so now we're free to do what we need to do. So the increased cost of this, which, it isn't in the article itself, you just put that into the motion, but it will be $1.1 million instead of $1 million.
Any questions or comments on this article? I entertain a motion on Article 7.
Motion to approve Article 7 as written.
Thanks, Dan.
I second.
Thanks, Marianne. All right, we'll vote. Dan?
Yes.
Mark?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Jean?
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
Marianne?
Yes.
And Ed is a yes. That's 7-0. The article is approved.
Okay, thank you. The next one is the so-called de-leading opportunity. Now, I will say that this is as of last spring when the MWRA sort of said what is available for communities. They have not changed that. So, you know, but obviously under COVID, anything can change. So we're anticipating borrowing from the MWRA $1.5 million to help de-lead the system. You know, that will consist of work in some cases between the water main itself and houses that are very old connections. And in Reading, which is very unlike any other city in town, we actually own and maintain the water system right up to the house. Usually cities and towns just own the water main, and it's up to the resident to get the water from the main to the house and deal with that. So that's really a pretty nice service for the community. In sewer, we are more traditional. We only own and maintain the sewer line in the street, if you will, and it's up to the property owner to deal with what's on their land. If for some reason the opportunity changes, it's just dead authorization. It's allowing us to do it. If we can't do it, we can't do it. If there's a change in timing, you know, we won't borrow in the first year that we expected. It might be the second year. So it's, in this case, it's really totally up to the MWRA to offer this. And again, there's another article later. This was as of the spring, and they've not indicated any change. And in fact, if you recall in June town meeting, they were very, very helpful by cutting their charges, wholesale charges to communities by a significant amount. So one would suppose they got federal money, although I can't say that for a fact, but they have to have got it.
That makes sense. Thanks, Bob. I guess my first comment's a little bit unrelated. It relates to the town owning the water all the way to the house. Is that something that we've ever explored? Not doing it, and does that have an impact on? And I'm more asking conversely if the town would ever consider taking the sewer line from my house, because that might be a little bit, that's an expense I don't want to have to incur. I'm more just joking on that one, but as it relates to the other piece, is that ever something that we've looked at as a town?
Yeah, we have, and the employees of the water division all feel very, very, very strongly that they like it the way it is, that they're responsible for the water right up to the house, and that they feel good about that. They feel responsible about that. All it really is paying the town to do work that you might have to pay individually if you had a problem on your property. It's our response. It's almost like an insurance policy. So everybody pays a little amount, and then if there's a calamity, then the town will fix it.
Gotcha.
So it does add some amount of cost. We tried to do that 5 years ago. There's just no easy way to figure that out. It's not like 10% of the water bill or anything like that. It's something smaller. But yeah, the department feels really strongly that they like this way. And honestly, sewer has never come up as a discussion. I really don't know why. I think there's generally less problems with sewer lines than water. Usually it's a tree root or something.
Yeah.
And we're paying for water, so when there's a leak, it's very much an incentive for us to fix that.
Makes sense. Any questions, comments on this article? This one's in 9, right? Am I reading it right?
Does Marianne have her hand up?
Yeah, I had my hand up. I just had a question. Does this relate to things that aren't residential, like the lead water problem at Killam? Would this try to fix that, whatever's in the pipes going to Killam, if that's what was causing the lead problems at Killam?
That's a really good question. I've not heard that it would, but I can't say that for sure. I've been told it would be residential, but I can't 100% say that's all. I just don't know.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, comments on Article 9? Entertain a motion for Article number 9.
I think it's number 8, Ed.
Oh, shoot. I knew I was reading it wrong.
You're racing ahead.
Yeah, sorry. That's right. 8. So apologies for Article 8.
Motion to approve Article 8 is written.
Thanks, Eric.
I'll second.
Thanks, Marianne. Move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marianne.
Yes.
It is a yes. 7-0. Now we can move on to Article 9.
Long awaited. This is the largest debt authorization. This is the downtown work. The actual debt authorization will be for the total, 4.3 million. But as I mentioned, we expect to borrow it in 2 ways, $1.5 million, like the previous one at no interest rate cost, and then the balance, 2.8 million on our own. You can see here kind of an estimated cost of and what streets, and you know, if you look at this and you looked on a map, you'd say downtown. I mean, it's around the railroad tracks, it's around the downtown area. This last item here is to actually go under the railroad tracks with some work for water mains. That's very expensive and very difficult. As you can imagine, you want to be a little careful going under a train tracks. Just for convenience, this year I've added what would be described as the next phase, which again is not planned for another 5 years or a few years. And again, these are the streets that are relatively near downtown. You can see the biggest one by far is Woburn Street, the length from Main Street all the way to West Street. So that's the biggest project. But that's 5 years away. But I just wanted to show it, for convenience sake. And again, these costs, except for the jacking, do include paving. So, and that's why there has to be some coordination with the above the ground streetscape improvement as we get closer to the end of the below ground work. And I should add, just to make sure I say it, much of this work, both water, sewer, and stormwater, is related to the economic development in the downtown area. It could be, especially the sewer and stormwater, was not as much of a hurry. Water was a little more important to do it anyways, as you can see from the different streets. But this is again, we've asked for residents to move downtown. We've encouraged builders to build it downtown. And this is one of the infrastructure components, if you will, of that. But regardless, if nothing was being built and no one moved down there, these are projects that would have to be done. But there's a reason now to just advance it a bit.
Any questions, comments? If there isn't any, I can entertain a motion on Article 9.
Motion to approve Article 9 is written.
Thanks, Dan.
Second.
Thanks, Marianne. You beat it. You got it in there.
That's my role tonight.
You'll be well represented in the minutes. I'll move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marianne.
Yes.
It is a yes. It's 7-0. It passes.
Article 10 is same location, a little more specific. It's generally in and around Haven Street, and this is the sewer system. And this one is a lot less at just $1 million. So again, like water, I didn't get into details, but the reason to hurry the water one was fire flow. That's typically the reason why you need more capacity in a water system. It's not to make, to provide drinking water. It's to provide drinking water and be able to handle a big fire at the same time. So for sewer, it's actually, I don't know if it's still windy outside, but it was going to rain. This is peak rainfall. This is the concern that, the sewerage system overflows when you get a lot of rain. So again, the sewer capacity is fine for its traditional use. You got to add a little capacity to deal with peak rainfall.
Any questions, comments on Article 10? If not, can I entertain a motion on Article 10?
Move to approve Article 10 as written.
Thanks, Dan.
Second.
There you go, Marianne. Be consistent. You're not doing anything. You gotta be consistent. That's awesome. All right, we'll move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marianne.
Yes.
That's a yes. 7-0.
We're moving.
Last one is stormwater, again, related to the downtown area. In this case, we've already done some work for the post office area, and we discovered, and they later discovered, quite a bit of ledge. So again, it's just drainage improvements in the area. And this one is a requirement federally.
Is that because of the post office, or is that just?
No, because of this thing here that's, referred to as the NIPTES MS4 permit. So there's some fairly rigorous stormwater management practices now. So when someone comes in and builds anything in town that's large, they have to show a plan where they contain all their runoff on their property, that it doesn't dump out into the neighborhood or into the public way. So that's also a requirement for the town, that we have to do our part in the street.
Okay. Any questions on this one? Comments? No, if there's none out there, we can entertain a motion.
Move to approve Article 11 as written.
Thanks, Dan.
A second.
Very good, Marianne. Awesome. Let's move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean. You say yes, Jean?
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you say my name. Yes.
Sorry, Jean. Apologies, I'm going to get closer. Nick,
Yes.
Marianne,
Yes.
and Ed is a yes. 7-0.
Okay, thank you. Article 12 rather is a bylaw that you generally don't review. And then Article 13 is kind of interesting. I don't know if FinCom should vote or not. I guess there's no harm. Someone has approached the town to donate a parcel of Timberneck Swamp to us. There's still some ongoing discussions with Conservation Committee. It's my expectation that the land will be given directly to Conscom and that this article can be tabled. But if for some reason that doesn't work out, this is a backstop where town meeting can accept this as a gift. So this is actually written the exact same way as the land we purchased in Timberneck Swamp, which by the way fell through. I reported on that a couple of years ago. But in this case, there is no money expected. So the motion itself previously was, I think it was authorized the town to spend $25,000 to buy such and such a land. In this case, the motion itself would be to accept as a gift. So you know, it's not spending money. I don't know what FinCom wants to do, and it probably will be tabled.
Bob, is that the, that parcel of land that's kind of in the center of the swamp surrounded by conservation land?
Let's see if I guess I didn't put a map in yet. Oh, that's interesting. I better hurry up. No, it's further south. It's kind of in the southeast corner almost, if you can picture it.
Yeah.
It's south, quite a bit south of the parcel we were looking at before, which was much more in the center.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
I don't see any harm in, voting on it, except, as a acceptance of the gift and just have it in there, even if it doesn't get tabled, then it's.
Yeah, I don't see any harm either. And, it's always nice to accept gifts.
Yeah, and I think it's sending the right message, I think, at the end of the day, too. I mean, accepting gifts is probably, we want to seem welcome to that. Any other questions or comments on this Article 13?
I don't want to not accept a gift, but I guess the only question I have is there any potential cost to the town with, I don't know anything about this land. I don't know anything about this land. Is there potentially anything about this land that could down the road be a cost to the community that we're not foreseeing? Have those questions been asked, or are
Yeah,
we comfortable?
well, they've been asked by Conscom, and the answer if Conscom gets it as a gift is no. And I can't really imagine why that answer would change by the town if it was given to the town. So if it's given to the town, we're just going to then turn around and give it to Conscom. It's
Okay.
legal paperwork.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any tax paid on that, real estate tax on the land today?
Yeah, it's really nominal. It's like $100 or $80 or something really small.
Huh.
Maybe it's a little more than that, but it's not much.
Any questions, Bob?
I think it's assessed at around $10,000 or $12,000, just to give you a measure.
There's no other questions or comments. I'll entertain a motion for Article 13.
Move to approve Article 13 as written.
Thanks, Dan.
Second.
Thanks, Marianne. I don't even know why I bothered to check. I should have just assumed it was you, but I'm trained that way. We'll move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Marianne.
Yes.
And Eddie, yes, that passes 7-0.
Thank you. That completes your business under the warrant. I can leave some minutes up if that would be helpful.
Yeah, let's do that. And actually, before we do that, I just kind of, because I wanted to kind of get through the other pieces, we kind of tabled, the discussions for next meeting, which would be the next one. What's today, the 7th, 1st. And so, but Bob, you were mentioning, so that one, that next meeting is what we'll spend a lot of time talking about the debt to capital.
I guess
the operating budget.
we'll try to give it our best shot at presenting. Sharon's given you a picture of the revenues. I don't think those have changed at all in the last 2-3 weeks. We'll give you a best guess at accommodated costs, and I think those are sort of okay. The most uncertainty in them is in the school budget, and technically that's 1 year later, not now, so there's a little more certainty. And then we'll just show you the result of that with, with no free cash is whatever, and then with different intervals of free cash is some other, percent increase. With no free cash, it's pretty close to zero, I remember. And then, I guess there's different discussions. You can certainly discuss any of the accommodated costs. What should be our policy on OPEB going forward? And I honestly don't remember what I've assumed. I think I may have assumed 500,000, which is where we were. Most of the accommodated costs are not really optional. That's the one I could think of. And then capital is clearly optional. So, I'll make sure you get a sense of, let's just say for $2 million of free cash, here's what the operating budgets would look like. For another $500,000, here's what it looks like. And then, you can be thinking, well, that $500,000 could come from free cash or from not spending money on capital. And then just kind of see where the conversation goes. It's just so hard to tell this year. This is gonna be hard.
Just a question to the committee members. Is there anything that anyone can think of kind of as right now that we'd want to see in the interim to review, or anything to ask of kind of Bob or Sharon in order to kind of help prepare, do a little bit of the thinking that we want to do over the next couple of weeks? It might be an unfair question, but I'll ask it anyways.
I'd just like to know what assumptions are not in the budget when it's presented, and just kind of how those are the same or different from historical comparable assumptions.
Yeah. One question that you can help us with is, it's far away, but should we be putting in COVID costs, or should we leave that aside and have a separate discussion about it? You don't have to answer tonight, but that's something that could come up next week.
Also, if there's any kind of I'll call it a sensitivity analysis, Bob and Sharon, where, if you were to say, where are the areas where whatever the increment of spending is would have a bigger impact on, in other words, what can you defer and what can you not defer? Where, in what situations is deferring a cost going to make it likely that you're going to incur a much larger cost in a future year? That's helpful for us to know to make decisions.
And I should point out, I'm not sure what the dollar figure will be at all, but there will be a request for a community priority, if you will. That's one of those things that kind of gets shared by the town and the schools. And it has to do with the ad hoc committee on human rights desiring a position in the library budget. So I don't think we're going to see that. I don't think I'm going to know the magnitude of those costs until the library trustees put together a budget this winter. But just be aware that's out there.
Anything else from anybody? Any other, kind of questions or requests? All right, do we want to review the minutes from last meeting? Everybody get a chance to review the minutes? And if so, questions or comments? I'll entertain a motion to approve.
There's no comments. I make a motion to approve the minutes from 9/23/2020.
Thanks, Dan.
I can second. I was leaving it for someone else, but This
Take
is
it.
the last thing we
Take it,
can do.
Mary Ann. This is your night. Take it.
Sure.
Thanks,
Long night.
Thanks, Mary Ann. Move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
Ed. Yes, that's 7-0. I don't think we have any other business, unless I missed something. Not bad.
If anyone has any thoughts in the next 10 days, by all means, just drop me an email
Yeah.
about the next financial forum. I assume you want to start that one at 7 o'clock, and thank you for delaying tonight. That was very helpful.
I didn't think we had a choice, but you're welcome.
You wouldn't have had a full attendance at 7, but you could have started.
No, that's and so yeah. I mean, I'd recommend 7.
Okay.
Motion to adjourn.
Without even being prompted, Dan. That's what I like to say. Excellent. Do I have a second?
Second.
Consistency, Mary Ann. Love it. All right, move to a vote. Dan,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Jean,
Yes.
Nick,
Yes.
Mary Ann,
Yes.
and Ed, yes. 7-0. Just over 2 hours. Not bad. I mean, we were tacking hard there. That was nice work. Everyone
Excellent.
together. That was nice.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Adjourned. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate it. In a couple weeks.
Good job.